evening. I'm glad to see so many people have turned out. Don't worry about the weather. It'll be there when we get back outside. I want Mag to stand for just a minute because Mag works with us and she's in and out of Fort Wayne often as we're on our journey around deep learning. So you want to stand, Mag? Many of you know who she is. We appreciate her work and we appreciate her introducing us to our speaker, who is part of the Deep Learning Network. And so I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Jean Clinton.
Well, hello, Fort Wayne. I just want to open with saying that in Canadian terms, this is a rainfall. This is pleasant weather. So I'm not worried about getting out tomorrow at all. In Toronto, they're having freezing rain and trees are falling over. So I'm so thrilled to be here. What a place you have. Wonderful, wonderful hospitality and welcoming to MAG so many times. And everyone has just opened their arms and folded me into this deep learning community that you are. So I'm going to speak with you a little bit tonight about my kind of learnings that are relevant to your learnings as a community. And the title we have is Connecting the Dots. So I'm going to connect the dots between what's happening in the schools here with great passion and what is needed and what is happening in the community. It tells us that what we need for our kids to thrive, like we saw these amazing young people playing tonight, weren't they fantastic? Just so fantastic. But I think we need to think about what is the village like that is needed to raise kids like this? What is it that we need to do, not only within our schools, but within our connections to the community? That village, it takes a village to raise a child. In our life now, we're seeing that is so, so true. I hear all the time from schools across my country and here that you cannot do it alone. You cannot do it alone. But what we are finding is that schools have a huge influence on who the citizens of tomorrow are going to be. So you're going to hear from me. I have to tell you that I love the brain. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the brain. You're going to hear that I'm a child psychiatrist, and I'm going to make sure that by the end of here you love Scottish child psychiatrists from Canada. Everybody's going to say, oh, aren't they nice? And I'm going to make you think of the great movie Mrs. Doubtfire, when you hear my Scottish accent, so you think of Robin Williams, so that's great. So one of the things I've had the opportunity to do while I've been here is meet with many of your leaders, meet with many of your teams and your principals, and I want you to think as well about the challenge that I presented to them. And this is a brain-based activity. I'll tell you what you have to do, and that is for you to think about 3 things that you didn't know before. And then I want you to think about 2 things that are so interesting that you'll continue to research them or share with somebody else. And then 1 thing that you will change about your practice based on the information shared today. So I stole this. I steal tons of stuff. I'm like, do you have magpies here? The bird, the magpie, with the big... So magpies in Scotland steal lovely, shiny stuff. And that's what I do. I am a magpie. I steal all of this wonderful, shiny knowledge from elsewhere, and I translate it into ways that people can understand and that I can use in my practice. So I stole this directly from a wonderful neuroscientist at Harvard, Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa. And so as I'm asking you to think about 3 things that are new, I'm activating one part of your brain. as I'm asking you to think about something that is interesting that you're going to continue to research, that's another part of your brain. It may be something that's based on prior learning, and you say, ooh, I want to learn more about that. That's another neural pathway, brain cells connecting up with each other. And one thing that you'll change, so that is focusing your attention. And man, oh man, we don't learn if we don't have attention, if we don't have engagement. So I've been telling people while I've been here that as a child psychiatrist, I've been a child psychiatrist for over 30 years. I know I don't look that I could possibly have been in practice that long. Thank goodness for my hairdresser. But I spent so many years in clinical work and I loved it. I really miss working with kids. But what I found was that I was in the middle of a rushing stream, trying as much as I could to book as many kids and families as I could and do school visits, but I was only catching one or two at a time. And I had a fabulous mentor, Dr. Paul Steinauer, and he taught me that what we need to be doing also as child psychiatrists is going upstream to figure out why are kids falling in the river in the first place. So that's why we're here tonight. We're here tonight to say, as a community, of people who care passionately about kids, what can we do to prevent them falling in the first place? Well, I've been pretty provocative at times while I've been here because my thinking is being influenced a whole lot by what's going on across the world. And across the world, people are saying, we've got an emphasis, and we've got this big test called PISA, the Program for International Student Achievement that compares kids from different countries on math and literacy and science. So we've got these big international comparisons, but the people there are saying, are we measuring the right thing? Are we actually measuring what matters in life and for kids? Because what we know, because of the explosion of the internet and that we can get content wherever we want, whenever we want, that's not what education needs to be about anymore. That what education needs to be is about how can kids learn how to learn? How can kids and young people and educators learn how to get along with each other, to collaborate? The skills that they're going to need for the jobs that we don't even know what they're going to look like. It's a scary time in one way, but in another way, it's a liberating time. So it's not content that we need to be filling our kids up with, but competencies. How to communicate with others. How to get along and problem solve and show empathy and compassion to collaborate. How to be problem solvers and critical thinkers. How to be citizens that care about great things that matter, like climate change, like having clean drinking water. So there are many, many things that our kids need that are becoming way, way more important than what maybe we first started in education. So this slide is from our group, the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning team. And it really is talking about a moral imperative now for education. It's still hugely important to address inequities in outcomes for education, absolutely. But education now has to be about not just that academic achievement and excellence and equity, but it also has to be about good at life. So education, and I'm provoking educators all across the world now to think about the change in your role from thinking about yourself as a content deliverer to being a human developer. That what the role of education is has changed. There's been a seismic shift, and it's time to get on the bandwagon with that shift. The operating system is changed. So the moral imperative is to be good at life and to be good at learning. When you have that engagement in learning, you have the successful life. But you know, Dr. Robinson mentioned we need to be thinking about the adults in this equation. And so what we need is to understand, not only you've all heard about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, and we think about what kids, the life context, the life circumstances of kids, but more and more what we're hearing is we need to know about the life circumstances of our educators and pay attention to them and be the support that they need. We need to be the village for so many of our wonderful educators who get themselves up, pull themselves together, and get out the door. And when you hear their stories, you say, man, oh man, how did you do it? How did you do it? We have to make that huge shift from asking not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you to understand the life circumstance. So that means we need to be thinking about each individual and whole child. So I'm going to give you some background science to this. So this is not just the ramblings of a pleasant-sounding Scot, but in fact, lots of science. So, as I'm talking about it, I want to plant a seed very, very firmly. And that is that well-being, that good at life, that well-being is not something that you add on Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock. I've visited many places and they say, yeah, we're about academic achievement and well-being's really important, but they've got them separate. What we really need to be thinking about is how can, in the drip, drip, drip of everyday education, that we're thinking about both academic achievement, well-being, great learning. So when I think about what do we need to be thinking of, well, we need to be thinking of different approaches to this well-being. And I interchange. When I think about what's the road to well-being, there is having social and emotional learning. There is having positive relationships and knowing about relationships. And what I'm going to infuse it with tonight is having educators and cultures that focus on the 6 C's competencies that I'll talk about. So this slide is really all about, you can bring in some taught curriculum, and there's some fabulous stuff out there from CASEL, which is the organization that you're basing lots of your social and emotional learning plan on. There's Ruler, there's Tools of the Mind, there's Zones of Regulation, there's Tools for Life, all kinds of programs that are teaching kids how to become more aware of themselves, how to develop self-regulation, how to become aware of those kinds of things. One of the errors that are often made is, one, we only do it for kids with trouble. And in fact, what we know is all kids need this. They not only need it when they're little, but boy, oh boy, once the complicated world of adolescence comes in and the darn cell phones, holy, do they ever need more of that social and emotional learning happening there. So there's taught curriculum, but then there is caught curriculum. And that is what a focus on deep learning is all about. It's saying, how can the culture be one that all kids feel that they belong, that all kids feel that their identity and what they bring to school really matters. So far, for so many years in our country, we have privileged certain ways of knowing. And so our kids who come in, who can read and write, that knowledge is given preferential treatment. They're the things that we mark and we treasure. You know, you treasure what you measure, and you measure what you treasure. Well, now we're saying, hang on, being a good citizen is something that we really need to be thinking about our kids, helping them develop that. Being good citizens to each other as staff and as principal, too, is a very, very important thing. So what do our young people tell us? This is from the National Commission on Social and Emotional Learning. And what they're telling us is that we know that we learn best when adults know us. when they make us feel safe. They hold us responsible for our learning, and they help us work constructively and productively together. This is the voice of our young people saying, this is how we learn best. So, sometimes when I talk about positive relationships as the heart of the matter, people think that, it's just about being nice. Well, being nice is an important first step, but it ain't all there is. Many of us here as parents, I have 5 kids and 5 grandchildren. I am very nice. I'm very nice. But unless I had high expectation, high warmth, but high control, my kids would have had none of the structure that they needed in order to do well. So high expectations is a crucial part of any educational endeavor. But what the kids then said is, in too many of our schools, key pieces of this equation are missing. This affects our learning and our performance, and we risk not learning key skills that will set us up for success, both now and in the future. Do we listen to student voice? I would so love to just sit and hang out with these young people who were here tonight playing and say, tell me, you love what you do, and you are so frickin' good, I can't believe it. But what are the things that made a difference in your education? What are the things that made you so passionate that you practiced? How many hours have they practiced together? How many hours have they practiced individual? How are we capturing that passion in education for our kids? How do we do it? Well, you know what? I'm sure behind these great kids is a teacher who is passionate, who cares, who's there to listen, is a shoulder to cry on. I don't know who the teacher is. But when you've got this kind of dynamic, passionate excellence, there's relationship at the core. There's relationship at the core. So you know what that means? That means as educators and those of us in the community in mental health and boys and girls clubs and all of the other surrounding partners that make the village a healthy one for kids, we really need to stop and think about, what's your view of the child? I'm reading a great book now called The Gardener and the Carpenter by Alison Gopnik. And she asks us to think about what is our view of the child and what's our view of our role with kids. So we can look at the child as an empty vessel that needs to be filled up with what we know. We can think of our role as being like carpenters. We've got an outcome that we want. We get the right bits and curriculum and pieces in place and the right assignments, and then they turn out stamped just the way we want them. Or do we think of kids as powerful co-creators of their learning, of rich in resource, rich in potential? And do we see our role then more as being a gardener, someone who knows the rules of nature, who's not going to plant in winter, but is going to create that lovely soil that creates the nurturing that helps that individual plant, that individual child be their own unique self and reach the potential, whatever that is. You know, education from millennia ago was described as not about filling the bucket, but about igniting the flame. Well, these guys were so hot. That flame was so lit. How did it happen? These are the studies we need to look at. Why? Because what we know from surveys is that kids' engagement in school as they go on in high school diminishes dramatically. Many kids are so bored in school. We're not meeting their developmental needs, but even greater than that, there's no way we're tapping into the amazing resource and brains that they have. So I have this thing about the brain. I don't know when, I was always interested in the brain, but in the past 15, 20 years, I know, as I read that from the social emotional learning, I can now, and I'm kind of a weirdo, because I think about, having high expectations. If you are with somebody who has high expectations of you, where does that happen in the brain? As you know, as I look down and I get a lovely smile back in the social interaction here, where is that in the brain? And I recognize that it's in the reward circuitry in the brain. So I've become a brain geek, and a huge thing that we have discovered is that we all have massive potential. We were fed a line before that your genes were determined by what you got from your mum and your dad, and your genes determined your destiny. And I joke about that, genes for intelligence, they're shared between mum and dad, and so the oldest in the family is the smartest, and then the kids get dumber as it gets diluted out. Not true. Not true. I'm number 4, and by far I am the smartest of our 6. But why do we care about the brain? Well, what we know now is that the brain, the neurons in the brain, literally get turned on or silenced by experience. Big studies looking at the number of words that kids hear, and you've heard about this, Hart and Risley, the meaningful difference in American children's language, and what they showed was that in the first 3 years of life there is massive brain growth. So the neurons are all in place, but the exposure, the experiences, the nurturing, the talking, the reading, the singing, the reading, the lullabies, all of these things literally turn the brain cells on to make connections. So we want to get the foundation really well and entrenched, but it's not just ending there. I read a fabulous book called The Brain That Changes Itself. And The Brain That Changes Itself is a psychiatrist from Toronto, actually, who brought together all kinds of stories of people who are looking at how the brain develops. What's the connection to education? As kids are learning and are in relationships in schools, their brains are changing. As I asked you for the 3, 2, and 1, as you're thinking about that and thinking about what I'm saying, your brain is changing. There's a massive change that happens in adolescence again, a different time. But the great news is that the brain is capable of change throughout life. I am, and as Dr. Robinson said, many of us in here are lifelong learners. That literally means that your brain is capable of change throughout life. Well, in Ontario where Mag and I come from, we have a big issue with equity. Because if you're a black kid, if you're an Indigenous kid, on average, you ain't going to do as well as those white kids. And so that means we really need to be thinking about what bias are you coming in with. But we also need to be infusing in those kids that they say, my brain is fantastic. My brain, I can change by learning. Let me get excited about something. Don't just give me Black History Month, but give me black teachers. Give me people that I can look up to, and my brain can see that's who I can possibly be. But give me stuff that's relevant to my world. My brain can change. I can change my neurons and my synapses. This is all the mindset stuff. In England, where they are putting this into great effect, it's magnificent, the changes that are happening. So the mind is not fixed, the brain is not fixed, and if the brain ain't fixed, it is not, I don't mean not fixed as in broken, right? But if the brain is malleable and changeable, then so is the mind. So, a couple of concepts in neuroscience that we need to think about. One is the brain is a social organ. We are literally wired to connect. We know that infants who experience neglect show failure to thrive and die. You know, we had dreadful experiences in Canada where children were taken from their parents, our Indigenous kids were taken from their parents, and the biggest thing that happened, one of the biggest things that happened, was many of them died. They died of loneliness. The brain needs other people. Our hearts, our souls need other people. But the brain is a social organ, and the primary environment is our matrix of social relationships. So some of you now have seen this little video, these two little videos. I want to share with you the fact that the brain is a social organ. And it gets built not by flashcards or fancy things on iPhones and iPads, or baby Einstein, or baby Beethoven, or baby Britney Spears, you know, baby Tupac, who knows what's next. Baby Taylor Swift is on the way. What they get built by is this serve and return. So this is my little grandson at 2 weeks of age. Watch this. My son is saying to him, just in case the sound isn't loud enough, my son is saying to him, stick out your tongue. But it's what he does that Liam is so engrossed with. Oh, I'm supposed to do this. So what's amazing there is little Liam at 2 weeks of age doesn't even know that he has a face. and here he is. He's imitating. Are we using this drive for social connection? Are we using this drive for social connection, the social brain, as much as we can to support the development? If we were, and we actually have a very neat lab at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, if we were to wire these guys' brains up as they're playing, and you know how they would play to each other a bit and then back off and then do a solo and then back in together, we now know through the science, the neuroscientists at Mac, that their brains literally get into sync. Their brain waves start moving together in the same kind of rhythm. And that is one of the greatest examples of the brain as a social organ. Now watch this little guy who's 18 months of age. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? So that little guy there, believe me, has not been to a Mums, Tots and Empathy series of classes. And yet, here he is at 18 months. I just love the way that he looks up at the guy at the end to say, did I get it? Did you get it? You know, were we in sync there? So if this drive to help others is so innate, are we using it? Are we using it in our education system, or are we setting up things so that kids are competing against each other? Are we doing this drive to help others, to collaborate, to communicate, to think creatively together? Or are we harping up another tree completely? So, the brain science has taken a huge dive into what we need to be thinking about and doing in education. This is a series of slides. The blue is the maturation of the brain. So you can see the maturation starts at the back of the brain and goes all the way to the front of the brain. And the last area to develop is the area called the prefrontal cortex, or the executive director. That is under construction until 25 years of age. Under construction. So adolescents are not many adults. And in fact, there's a whole new stage of mankind called emerging adulthood between 18 and 25. It's socially sanctioned. Kids aren't going off and they're starting university, but then they're coming back and ending up starting college and coming back and ending up in the frickin' basement. Emerging adulthood, socially sanctioned. But you know, the world has changed our expectation of kids. It's not that the kids are lazy and not taking on jobs. It's the fact that the world sociologically has changed. I'll give you a very blunt example of it, of how the world has changed and how we have to modify our view of what young people have to contribute. So when I was a kid, I'm 65, and when I was a kid, we used to play musical chairs and you took away a chair. Now, oh my Lord, are you kidding? If you take away a chair, one of the kids doesn't have somewhere to sit. And the parents are horrified. And I want to scream out, but that is the frickin' point. They have to learn how to deal with it. So the world has changed. Have we kept up with the change? People say to me, when I talk just about the adolescent brain, they say, well, you know, the frontal lobes were pretty well developed in Romeo, well, let's not say Romeo and Juliet, they were 14 and 15, but Alexander the Great was 15, Marie Antoinette was 16, 14, 15. So what has changed? One family doctor came up to me and said, when I was a kid, at 16, I joined the Merchant Navy, and by 19, I was in a leadership role. What's wrong with kids these days was his question, but really it's not what's wrong with kids, it's how has society changed. What I know about adolescence is it is a magnificent time when kids have such drive and passion like we see here. How do we capture that? How do we create that? They have amazing love of novelty. Are we using that? Hello, 12th grade calculus. The brain loves novelty and lack of effort. Hello, high school. Are we using what we know about the brain? So what we know is that when the brain is fully formed, as it were, that executive function which is responsible for governing emotions, judgment, planning, organizing, problem solving. So that is being formed. Now, does that mean that kids aren't capable of thinking? Absolutely not. They can think and come up with solutions creatively that we would never think of. But if they've got their peers around and there's a sense of stress or pressure, it's the limbic system, it's the emotional system that's going to be the driver. That when you've got that emotional system activated because of threat, because of not feeling that things are fair, not feeling that you are appreciated or belong, if you've got all of that activated, you turn off that thinking brain. You turn off that thinking brain. So, you know, when I visit classrooms where kids are fully engaged in learning, their attention is all zoned into what they have to learn, they're really excited about what they're learning. If I were to put the caps on their brain and take pictures, I would see tons of activity. But there are other classes, and you know who I'm talking about, that you would go in and the kids' alarm system would be turned on. The kids' boredom system would be turned on. I spoke with a group of students recently, and they said that were having lots of challenges with time management because they had to go home from school and do 2 hours of homework in each subject. And over the holidays, they had to do all kinds of assignments. And then they also, because they want to get into a good university, they have to volunteer and have this, you know, they have to have frickin' paddled the Amazon with Hemingway in order to get into one of their colleges. And I said to them, you know, the problem isn't that you have poor time management. The problem is there's only 24 hours in a day. And we have a responsibility as educators to get together and say, let's case manage this situation here. Let's see how my math class and what I'm doing there and your global studies class and citizenship and management and business, how are they interacting with each other so that our kids are going to be able to stay sane? Why is this? Well, one of the big reasons that I want to talk about just for a minute is because we are seeing an epidemic of anxiety. And I had some slides on that, but I must have forgotten to do it. So what we see, oh, here we are. So what we're seeing is worrisome. And I know some of you here are involved in children and youth mental health. But in this study, the Pew Research study that was done just last year, was asking US teens about what are the major problems that they see among their peers. 70% of them said that anxiety and next was depression were major concerns for them about their peers. In Ontario, where Mag and I are from, a survey was done of young people, and almost half of Ontario youth are missing school because of anxiety. So, you know, we learn best when we are in situations where we feel safe. Not only do we learn best, but when the anxiety is too high, you just can't learn. You can't learn. We know now that there are different degrees and levels of stress. And so as a community, as a society, and as a microcosm, you have to be thinking about how are we contributing to or withdrawing from kids' stress. So this is the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. I just wanted to touch a little bit on this, because I'm talking about anxiety and stress. But one of the points that I need to make is that positive stress can be good for you, right? You know, as I'm preparing my presentations, or when you're getting up in the morning and you want to get out to work, or you have to go and you're preparing an exam, that is positive stress. But then there is tolerable stress, which is stress that is buffered by relationship. The stress we really worry about is the toxic stress, and that is prolonged activation of that stress response system in the absence of protective relationships. So what does that mean? It means that our brain is wired up in a way that when we see a bear, we freeze, we fly, we take flight, or we fight. Deep inside our brain, in an area called, a number of neurons called the amygdala, we have a system that when we see this, we don't stop and say, oh my goodness, look, I didn't know bears' teeth were different sizes, right? Or, oh, what's that on your tongue? Is that blueberries or is it blood? You know, if our ancient ancestors didn't have this part of their brain, this high alert, watch out for danger, we would not have survived as a species. So what actually is happening in the brain, and I want you to think about this in situations where kids are worried about a teacher who might call on them when they are so embarrassed to talk. Or you've got a teacher, I have a big problem with some of the research, because it tells us that teachers who are sarcastic, particularly with younger adolescents, may be activating the alarm system rather than the friendship system like they think. But what happens is deep in your brain, your amygdala fires off and it says, watch out, be on guard, this is danger. The brain is an organ of developmental protection. So down come signals to a little organ on top of your kidneys that says, release adrenaline so I can get ready to run. Release cortisol, or stress hormone, so that I can keep on running. It makes energy, and I can heal, and I can do all kinds of things. So I can do my freeze, fight, or flee. Now there's another part up there called the hippocampus. And that hippocampus is the teacher's friend. It is new learning and memory. So if I've done a good job tonight, your hippocampi are going to be bigger when you leave the room than when you came in. And if you're really in tune with yourself, you'll even be able to feel it. No, that's garbage. I only made that up. But, so, we've got the stimulus comes in, it turns on the adrenaline, it turns on the excitement, the cortisol, and the hippocampus turns it off and says, it's okay, the bear's gone. But what happens if the bear is always there? What happens if the bear is always there? Well, what you see are, look at this series of symptoms. Irritability, poor memory, difficulty focusing, critical thinking difficulty, increased anxiety and fear. Does that look like ADHD to you? Does it look like trauma to you? Does it look like some children on the autism spectrum? So, are we educating with the brain in mind? So I've talked about emotion, but what about positive emotion? I've talked about anxiety and how we need to be thinking about anxiety. But you know, what we know from school mental health is that it is essential that we build this knowledge up on the bottom of a big triangle, that we build the knowledge up so that all kids have a strong sense of belonging and who they are as learners. That for some children, for some young people, we're going to need to have a bit more support. They come from higher risk situations. And then there are a few kids who actually need mental health support. We cannot be asking teachers to be therapists. We just can't do it. We need to be asking teachers to bring their humanity to class and bring the knowledge that kids learn terrifically well through their emotions. It is literally neurobiologically impossible to build memories, engage complex thoughts, or make meaningful decisions without emotion. This is the work of Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. And she says, when educators fail to appreciate the importance of students' emotions, they fail to appreciate a critical force in student learning. One could argue, in fact, that they fail to appreciate the very reason that students learn at all. So I've given you an example of how that emotion of anxiety interferes with learning. But what about the emotion of joy? What about the emotion that's affiliated with engagement? So, as a child psychiatrist, I met Mag and her team, Dr. Michael Folan and others, and I listened to them talk about deep learning. And so deep learning has at its core a framework that says if we build these competencies in young people and we have it occurring in a really solid frame of thinking about what are the classroom conditions that lead to maximizing this learning, and then what are the school conditions that maximize leading to those conditions that leads to the evolution of the 6 C's. So if we I want you to look at these 6 competencies, and I want you to ask yourself, as Mag asks in another context, are there any of these that we don't think our kids need? Are there any of these learnings that the world of 2030, that our kids who are starting school now will graduate in 2030? So when we're talking about character, we're talking about a proactive stance towards life and learning to learn. Grit, tenacity, perseverance and resilience, empathy, compassion, and integrity in action. Any of them that we say, nah, don't need that. Kids don't need it. Citizenship, a global perspective. Commitment to human equity and well-being through empathy and compassion for diverse values and worldviews. Genuine interest in human and environmental sustainability. Are we going to survive as a planet if our kids are not the ones who are fighting to say, we need to pay attention to this. Collaboration, working interdependently as a team. You know, I have great regard for Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a trauma specialist and a fantastic educator. And he says that instead of just having a declaration of independence, we need a declaration of interdependence. We need each other. We need to be looking after and out for each other. Communication designated for audience and impact, message advocates and purpose and make an impact, reflection to further develop and improve communication, voice and identity expressed to advance humanity. Dr. Fullen and his team talk about engage the world and change the world. I have example after example. A class just north of Toronto at one school where the kids had a playground behind their school and close by, of course, and so they wanted to go out and play in that playground, but there was too much glass and other kind of garbage around. And so they did, as a deep learning class, they did an inquiry into what could they do to clean up. Those kids were learning. They brought in the people from the city and they said, okay, we've got all kinds of glass strewn about here and syringes, and how can we get this all cleaned up? So they did an experiment, a physics experiment with their teacher and with the groundskeeper to see, well, what kind of material would be the best one for picking up the glass. They weren't actually trying to pick it up themselves, but they were directing the adults to do it. So they were, this is physics in action. So these are kindergarten, grade 1 kids. And so then they said, well, what we need to do is we need to let people know. So they then said, well, let's create a sign of some kind to put up in the park that tells people, kids play here, don't break your glass. And so that's what they did. They had a whole community involved and engaged in helping them select, and a sign got put in their park area. Can you imagine what those kids felt? Can you imagine if the teacher was looking at what are they doing in terms of critical thinking, evaluating information and arguments, making connections, identifying paths? They were doing all of this thing. So then why did I, as a child psychiatrist, want to jump into this? Because what I see is that relationships are the active ingredient in so much of the realization of the 6 C's in learning. And so there's some simple messages that comes along with this realization. And that is, we need to think about our view of the child, we need to think about our view of the adult, and we need to ask ourselves, how much time do I spend connecting with the kids? And how much time do I spend directing and correcting? I know that me as a mum of 5 have been the major party pooper of my kids' lives, right? But man, oh man, did I ever learn that repair is essential. I learned that number one thing for me is connect before you correct. Connect and say, I know this is hard. Now, am I perfect at it? Oh, my Lord, no. I'll tell you a story about one of my children who will go unnamed, Jojo, who taught me more about the adolescent brain than I ever wanted to know. So I'll share something just so you know I'm very grounded. If perhaps you want to know how to handle your adolescent son being brought home in the back of a police car, drunk out of their minds, I might have somebody that you might be able to talk to. It wouldn't be me. And now you're saying, why am I listening to this woman if this is what our kid is like? Well, he is a magnificent 25-year-old, fantastic guy. He went through some ups and downs, and boy, oh boy, I aged about 50 years. But what this child of mine said to me one time, I was so mad at him about something, probably thinking, oh, you're doing this and you're going to turn out to be a terrible person. I don't know, the things that parents do. Anyway, I'm screaming at him, oh, blah, 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 blah. And he says, Mum, you're a child psychiatrist. You know this doesn't work. He also said, Ma, it's no picnic being the child of a child psychiatrist. So, connect before you correct. This afternoon, I talked about making deposits, a John Gottman kind of idea of making deposits in the emotional bank account. This is good for us, those of us in relationships with our partners. Do we spend as much time depositing in that emotional bank account so that at the times when you have to take a withdrawal, there's lots in place? Well, the same is true in school. The same is true in education. But you know what? I'm going to assume that the same is true when you're thinking about community relations and connections. One of the things I'm involved in Hamilton just now is we had a very, very tragic event. A young boy, 14 years of age, was stabbed and killed just outside the school. He had complained lots about bullying. And this was his bully who did this, allegedly. So the school board decided to put together a panel, an expert panel. And what we're learning, what we're seeing, is that kids need to have voice. Kids need to have a caring adult that they can turn to. We can come up with an anti-bullying program, but unless we change the culture of the school, culture of the adults, that they feel supported. But what we're also learning is that the communities that have great connection, great relationship with their Boys and Girls Club, with their mental health agencies, with the other community partners, the schools that have that, the teachers feel better supported. The principal feels better supported. And so what we have seen is this, that the teacher creates the weather in the classroom. This was the first time I came across this was with Haim Ginot from Yale. But what we also know, a teacher came up to me and she said, Jean, you have to say that the principal creates the weather for the teacher. And I'm going to suggest to you that how well that principal feels supported and how well that board feels supported has a whole lot to do with the health within that organization of the adults and the community that they can themselves lean on. So, what is it that all students need at school? You might be wondering, what is it that they need? Well, what they need is a warm welcome. What they need is a smile and a connection to a caring adult every day. They need a chance to learn, a safe place to risk, someone who notices when something is wrong, someone who reaches out when they notice, someone who listens and tries to find help for them, someone who believes in them and instills hope. So now I want you just to transfer that what do all students need to what do all staff need. What do all staff need? If we're going to create mentally healthy classrooms for well-being, for great academic achievement, we need to be thinking about the well-being of the staff. So what they need is a warm welcome, a smile, a connection, exactly the same things. So how does this all tie together? I hope it's all tying together for you, but one of the key concepts for me is that when you think of the brain science, when you think of the learning science, when you think of the developmental science and the educational science, you see at the heart of the matter is relationships which create a sense of belonging. We have been studying, the royal we, have been studying so much the sense of belonging, and it's a lot more than just fitting in, as Brené Brown talks about. That sense of belonging means that you feel felt. So, brain geek comes in. What does it mean when you feel felt, when you have that sense of belonging? You release more oxytocin, the love, the hug hormone, and as you're releasing that oxytocin, you're neutralizing that cortisol, that stress hormone. As you have that sense of belonging, of feeling felt, of I can make a difference here, you also are releasing more of the neurotransmitter dopamine, the reward neurotransmitter. So what I long for in all of our kids is, here you see me with 3 of my grandchildren. You see my gorgeous 2-year-old twins now who are talking up a storm. Is that feeling felt? How do we create that environment in each and every classroom? And how do we really make sure we pay attention to social pain? What the science is now telling us is that when you don't have a sense of belonging and you actually experience social pain, like social rejection, abandonment, being teased in a way that you don't want, you feel and activate in your brain the same area as you do for physical pain. So, are we making a priority a sense of belonging? Are we creating, by the way, in our schools, a sense of belonging for parents? There is tremendous research that shows that the role of parents in kids' education is really high. And I hate to say it, I spent many years on parent advisories, but it's not about helping kids with homework. It's not about all of the bake sales, but how parents make the biggest impact on kids' learning is by being learners themselves. By asking, what did you learn today? By being interested, by showing that they themselves are learners. So this is tied to helping kids create a self of identity that they are learners. This is a story from this little picture is from a story about a little girl who came into a pre-kindergarten program. It was actually a summertime one. A group of a neighborhood where kids were not quite ready for the learning that's expected in school. They came together to help them learn about school. And this little girl was sitting by herself and she was saying, "I hate my hair." And the learning coach who was there, a gorgeous young woman, a gorgeous African-Canadian young woman, was just mortified that this little girl at 3.5 is already saying, "I hate my hair." What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of her sense of herself? And then Stephanie started to look around and saw that there was very little material that that little girl saw herself reflected in. So that she's brilliant. Off she went, and didn't some of the teachers create some of the literature that's now available for little ones? But you know, the point that I made earlier was made to me by Casey Knudsen from a deep learning lab. And he said that why I don't get to bring my identity into school when you privilege only certain ways of knowing. And you know, one of the things, the provocative things to think about, is why do kids enjoy so much more the things they do after school than they do the things in school? What's that about? Well, that's a call to action, to say how can we engage kids deeply in their learning? But it's also a call to action to say, we need kids to be literate and numerate, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you know, there are so many other things. Reggio Emilia is a city in Italy that talks about the 100 languages of children. Are we thinking about the individual needs of children, the individual strengths and potential of children? Or are we so busy with a view of the child that our job is to stuff the duck? That's what I call it, stuffing the duck. You know how the French do that? Those ducks and geese, they force feed them so they've got nice big livers. I won't take the analogy any further. Just stuffing the duck. Get that picture. But you know, a challenge is that we're living in an increasingly connected society but without real deep connections. This is Bruce Perry's work, and he says that that the relational landscape is changing. Children have fewer emotional, social, and cognitive interactions than ever before with fewer people. So we have, in fact, a poverty of relationships. The compartmentalizing of our culture into blocks has meant that we've got this material wealth, yet poverty of social and emotional social opportunities. Modernities Paradox. So one of the things that Mag and I were talking about with everyone we've met is one of the handouts that you have. And it's from the Search Institute. The Search Institute from Minneapolis is very well known for their developmental assets, saying that their research shows that when kids have strong external and internal assets, they do well and they're protected from harm. But now they're talking about how do you get those developmental assets in the first place? And so much of it is my broken record. Well, do you know, I used to say broken record until I asked a kid, well, you know, I was asking him about OCD, and I said, you know, sometimes in a broken record when it gets stuck on something, you know? And he said, what's a record? Right? So you know you're old when. But what the asset building group are now looking at, the Search Institute, is now looking at how do you go about building relationships. And we love this. I absolutely love this, because it's not, as I said earlier, it's not enough just to be nice and really caring. Absolutely essential that you are kind and you are caring. But you need more. You need to show and express care. So show me that I matter to you. Be dependable. Listen. Believe in me. Be warm and encourage. Challenge my growth. Push me to keep getting better. It's not about getting perfect. My mantra as a mum has always been progress, not perfection. Progress, not perfection. It's about getting to better. Provide support. Help me complete tasks and achieve goals. Share power. Trust me with respect and give me a say. Expand possibilities. Connect me with people and places that broaden my world. So one of the realities that Mag has introduced me to is the fact that this Search Institute relational framework is good for us too. If you look at this as an adult, is there anything here that you say, nah, don't really need that, thanks very much, no, don't need that. So we need to be thinking both about how we develop these with our young people, but how do we develop these with each other? Because, you know, what you think affects how you feel, affects how you act. I'll give you a story about this. This is a true story of one of my patients a number of years ago. So she was in grade 12, 12th grade, and she came late to school. And the particular teacher this morning absolutely hates kids being late. What he thought was kids these days, they're not respectful, they're entitled. What he felt was angry and annoyed, and how he acted was he said, you, down to the office now. So off she went to the office, missed half of the class as she waited in line to get her note to get back in. But then, the next day, isn't she late again? But it's a different teacher because she's on an A-B rotation. And this teacher says, okay, just go and sit in your desk. And then comes up to her afterwards and starts to ask her what's up. So what he thought was, her learning is more important right now. What he thought was, what's going on here? What he felt was curious and empathetic. And what did he learn? He acted by asking her, what's up with you? And what he learned was that her mum was very sick in hospital, that her dad was spending all the time that he could there, but their family business was a restaurant. And that meant that she had to go to the restaurant after school every day and close it up. So she was there until 2 o'clock at night. And so that's why she was tired. And by the way, she'd fallen asleep in the class as soon as she got to her seat. So that young woman, her brain was affected by those 2 encounters. The negative one stuck like Velcro. As she was talking about that, you could see in her, you could see the anger in her face. So it stuck like Velcro. But you know, that other teacher, that second teacher, also stuck like Velcro. She decided that she wanted to be a teacher because she wanted to be like him. How we think affects how we feel, affects how we act. So what's really important is that we think about, are we thinking, feeling, and acting in ways that are creating what my friend Steve DeGroot calls the 3 great states. And I invite you to think about these 3 great states in terms of your deep learning journey. Are you creating these conditions in your classroom? I invite you to think about them in your encounters with your staff and also with your community partners. What we know is that we can be the best version of us when we feel safe, when we feel significant. And that is that we feel valued and we feel valuable. We have that sense of belonging. We have the sense that our presence there matters. We can give that kid that sense of presence by saying, man, oh man, I'm glad you turned up today. And then, are we helping kids feel situated? That is, they have a sense of purpose. They know why they're there. Studies have been done in The Power of Purpose, is a book by Heather Mallon that talks about how few kids actually feel a sense of purpose other than they have to get through, they have to write the exams. But they don't have a sense of purpose about, why am I learning this? You bring in new pedagogies for deep learning, you have kids involved in inquiry-based learning and engaged in projects that they get excited about, like finding out what it's like to be homeless, by teaching their fellow students about their experience of sleeping out for 3 days, about visiting a homeless youth shelter, and fundraising to help those kids get cameras so that they could take pictures and create a life story that would be then taken to City Hall to advocate for more places for kids to stay. That is a true story of a deep learning classroom in Dundas, Ontario. Did those kids change the idea that they had for education? They surely did. I've spoken with a bunch of the kids, and they talk about making a difference in life rather than just about what university, which college they want to go to. So, safe, significant, and situated. And so a school curriculum that incorporates this well-being, this thinking about the social and emotional learning, that thinks about relationships and relational health in a school. That school curriculum, this was said by Lee Waters, incorporates well-being, will ideally prevent depression, increase life satisfaction, encourage social responsibility, promote creativity, foster learning, and even enhance academic achievement. And what I say, I do believe, is on the little bookmark that you were also given out, where the 6 C's are on it. And when I heard about the 6 C's, this is what I said, was struck with. A focus on the 6 C's immunizes and protects against social and emotional difficulties, thus building positive mental health and resilience. The 6 C's level the playing field for kids. It's all about relationship, relationship, relationship. Relationships are this active ingredient of the environment's influence on healthy child development. So let me give you one last slide, one last thing to think about, and then we're going to open the floor for questions. So I first heard, this is a Cherokee proverb, I first heard it in the indigenous culture in Canada. When you hear a story, you always acknowledge where you first heard it from. So I first heard it from a Cree elder in British Columbia. And so what he does, the elder is teaching the kids a lesson, one of the grandfather teachings. And he says, you know, life is really hard. We have to make hard decisions all of the time. We have to walk on eggshells trying to figure out which way do I go, what's the right thing to do, who do I listen, all of these things. So there's battles inside of us all of the time. And he said it's almost like we've got two wolves inside of us. One is evil. It's anger and jealousy and greed and resentment and lies, inferiority and ego. That wolf is battling with another wolf, which is good. It's joy, it's peace and love and hope and humility, it's kindness, empathy and truth. One of the little ones, right up at the front, says, "Grandfather, tell me which one wins." And he says, "It depends which one you feed." I'm so hoping that this time that we have spent together, that you will see that we have a path forward for our young people in Fort Wayne and in the many places that we are working together. That when we say we are going to focus on creating the greatest opportunity for reaching your potential, through helping you develop the competencies that are lifelong learning, that are lifelong building, that are going to help you be the best you can be. That's the journey, the path that Fort Wayne is on. And I am so thrilled to have had this opportunity to be with you, and I look forward to being snowed in and spending tomorrow with you too. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.